Hello, WHO. This is your war correspondent, Jack Shelley, reporting again from somewhere in Holland. The German bulge into southern Belgium is steadily crumbling these days, as you've been told, under the closing pinchers of the American First Army from the north and the Third Army from the south. But it's still a hard and bitter fight, and I hope you haven't been given the impression that the Nazi opposition has suddenly fallen apart, or that the struggle has become an easy rout. I heard the other day, for example, that some newspapers in London reported the situation in the Bulge was remindful of the days of the American breakthrough in France. Now that gives an impression of a great sweeping drive in which our forces knifed through with blinding speed and then looped around to cut off huge numbers of the enemy. And to say that's the way the battle has gone, down there in the snowdrifts and the bitter cold of the Ardennes, is cruelly unfair to the foot soldiers and the tank men who've had to fight their way slowly forward in what, to my mind, has been one of the bitterest offensive actions Americans ever fought against almost indescribable handicaps of terrain and weather. I've been down on the First Army front again, and I can tell you that although the enemy is being pushed steadily back, and his great offensive into Belgium is a thing of the past, every yard of these gains must still be paid for at a high cost in many parts of the front. We're still slogging our way through dense forests of pine and painfully working our way up steep ridges, fighting through snowdrifts many feet deep, trying to pick our way through dense German minefields and against a furious Nazi fire. The Germans may be withdrawing from a large part of the Bulge, but the rear guards they leave behind to protect that withdrawal are fighting all the harder. But the weather, thank goodness, has taken a turn for the better the last few days, and a bright sun was shining, although the air was still cold and crisp, when I went down to visit the 3rd Armored Division, which has been doing one of the outstanding jobs of this bitter campaign. And that gave us the thing we have missed so severely during the earlier stages of this attack: air support. Far up in the cold blue ceiling, I saw 200 American heavy bombers drone over within 5 minutes, their silver bodies gleaming in the winter sunlight, long white vapor trails caused by their passage through the cold atmosphere of the high altitudes unrolling behind them. Long before you can see the planes themselves, you spot these trails of white advancing through the blue, and after the bombers have passed, the milky traces hang in the sky for hours. The heavies passed on over, a beautiful sight that made almost every soldier who wasn't actually locked in battle stop to look up and smile. It's good to see your own air power up after so many days when you didn't have it because of weather. Farther south, over the German lines, puffs of anti-aircraft fire began to appear among the bomber formations, tiny little white balls that advanced ahead of the planes. The bombers altered their course now and then, but otherwise seemed unaffected by the flak. They headed on, apparently bound for a target deep in the German Bulge. We went on down to the front, and in a small room of a typical shell-torn Belgian village, we talked to General Rose, the handsome, gray-haired, forceful commander of the 3rd Armored Division. As we talked, we had to cut off our conversation every few moments when the blast of our own artillery drowned out every other sound, shook the house, and rattled the few windows left in the place. There was a rough fight going on in the village of Mont-le-Bain, held by the Germans. We heard a colonel commanding a task force report by radio from a command tank that he had pushed elements of his force into the town and was fighting his way through it against bitter opposition. We moved down closer and saw a sight that made the fighting men cheer. Circling up in the blue were American Thunderbolt fighter bombers. They peeled off their formation one by one and came screaming down on the target just on the other side of the wooded hill from where we stood. It was the best view of a dive bombing I've had yet. You could plainly see the cluster of bombs released from the plane as it reached the bottom of the dive. You could hear the rattle of German anti-aircraft fire as the Thunderbolt nosed down on the target, and then the blast of the bombs as they fell, a concussion we could feel from where we stood. One by one, the planes pounded the German position, and you could see the smiles broaden on the faces of the Armored Division men. This was the kind of air support they'd gone without for days as they battled through snow and fog and bitter cold. The air and armor combination, proved so often before, was getting a chance to function again. By the time we left, most of the bitterly fought town of Mont-le-Bain had been cleared. We went back by way of Fréjus, the little village near a vital crossroads, where some of the most savage fighting of this whole attack raged within the last week. All the way back to the crossroads, there was evidence of the deadly battle. Here lay the frozen body of a German soldier. There, an American. Beside the road, burned out tanks, many of them, and most of them ours, because we were attacking. Some of the tanks turned completely over. Others with turrets blown entirely off. The turrets hurled yards away from the rest of the chassis. The stone buildings of the little town of Précieux completely gutted. Only a few blackened walls left standing. And the trees of the forest along the road, torn and splintered, and those that were not broken off, gouged by flying shrapnel. Yes, the German Bulge is being collapsed. But please, in the name of the brave men who are fighting and dying here, don't let anyone tell you it's easy. It's bitter and brutal, and it takes almost incredible courage and endurance, and a lot of American lives. This is Jack Shelley, speaking from somewhere in Holland. I return you to Des Moines. Okay, NBC recording. That was the first of my 2 recordings, each of about 4 minutes duration, to be sent, if you please, right away by air express to the newsroom, radio station WHO, Des Moines, Iowa. I'll be up with the second and last of those 2 recordings in 10 seconds from now. Hello, WHO. This is your war correspondent, Jack Shelley, speaking from somewhere in Holland. It seems to be human nature to indulge in wishful thinking and speculation about the future, and one of the most common examples is the way all of us want to hear somebody else's prediction of when the war is going to end. Just about everybody over here at one time or another has given his weighty personal opinion on when Germany would be defeated, and by this time, practically all of those predictions, including those of some very important military and government officials, have been proved wrong. Most of the guesses have been so far off base, in fact, that it's hard to find anybody these days who wants to risk a guess. Field Marshal Montgomery, at his press conference recently, made it clear he didn't intend to. When a reporter asked him when the European war was going to end, he merely laughed and said, "I'm not playing on that one." But I found it interesting to learn the other day that the Germans evidently find predictions about the end of the war just as fascinating as we do. And apparently they'll swallow almost anything along that line. At least the sample I saw was so fantastic that I find it hard to understand how Nazi soldiers, even when they thought for a time their new offensive was going great guns, could really believe it, as apparently they did. The 30th U.S. Infantry Division obtained from a German prisoner of war a copy of a fantastic series of forecasts, which the prisoner said were circulated among his entire battalion, and presumably among others as well. The caption on the predictions claimed they were made by a Swedish fortune teller, whose name was given as Sven Green. Apparently to bolster belief in his alleged charting of the future, the propaganda sheet declared this Green was well known for his predictions about the First World War, the Russian Revolution of 1917, and foresaw in 1936 the beginning of this war. Then the Nazi caption went on to say that this Green, whom I for one never heard of, had predicted the Allies would invade France early in June 1944. One would have thought that if this fortune teller was for good, the Germans would have had better luck in meeting that invasion. Anyway, you might like to hear some of the tripe credited by the Nazis to this man Green, which was being circulated among the German troops as very serious predictions about the future. Here are some of them. But remember, this is a Nazi propaganda sheet that's being quoted. First of all, the fortune teller declared the Allies would suffer a great defeat late in 1944. If by that he meant the German counteroffensive that pushed into Belgium, it's certainly fallen short of what most Germans expected. Then he went on to make this old familiar prediction. A new German weapon with fantastic capabilities of destruction, he said, will cause great chaos in England. A chaos, he added with typical Nazi hypocrisy, out of which England will not be able to emerge without German help. Having warmed up on those, the fortune teller evidently decided to throw caution completely to the winds and really have himself a dream. So he went on. In April 1945, he predicted, Germany will be able to use her full might on the Eastern Front. And within 15 months, Russia will be defeated. Then, he adds calmly, Russia will probably be divided into small states. It's interesting, by the way, to note how the Nazis talk about that prospect for Russia with great satisfaction. But whenever anyone proposes that Germany be broken up into small states, the Nazis wail that this would be the greatest crime in history. Then, taking another drag on his dream pipe, the alleged fortune teller went on. During the summer of 1946, he said, German robot U-boats will destroy the remainder of the Anglo-American fleet. And having won this great paper victory for the Nazis, he evidently decided it was time he did something nice for Hitler's Japanese partners as well. So he came up with this whopper for them. Japan, during September of 1946, he said, will gain supremacy over all of China, Australia, and the southeast part of India. To the Japs, up to their eyes in defending the Philippines these days, that prediction must really be a great comfort. Then, to make sure his lineup of guesses ended with the German version of They Lived Happily Forever After, the fortune teller wound up with this one. After the end of the war, he said, all Europe will be led by Germany and will prosper as never before. Well, it's hard to believe that even the most thoroughly propagandized German soldiers could believe those products of a dream, but apparently a lot of them could. Perhaps their willingness to swallow such foolishness was increased by the temporary success of Marshal von Rundstedt's breakthrough into the American First Army front during the last month. But the bulge into Belgium is falling back now. The tide appears to be turning again. Russian armies are hammering harder than ever from the east. Maybe the only way the Germans can keep going is to dope themselves with such idle dreams as those I've reported to you. Perhaps. But never forget one thing. Whether he is doped with propaganda or not, the German is still fighting, and fighting well. Over the long run, he has the chance. But it will still take plenty to knock him out. This is Jack Shelley, speaking from somewhere in Holland. I return you to Des Moines. All right, NBC, that winds up my two recordings to be sent, please, by Air Express to the newsroom, radio station WHO, Des Moines, Iowa. At 4 minutes, I've only got one piece. Okay, then I'll start up with this one piece, which will you please, Air Express to the newsroom, radio station WHO, Des Moines. And I'll start it in 10 seconds from now. Hello, WHO. This is your war correspondent, Jack Shelley, calling you again from somewhere in Holland. There's a word described as the fighting quality of American troops. A word that even during these war times, I suppose, some people in the comfort of their homes might consider a little indelicate. But it's the only word I know that describes the sheer, raw, physical courage our fighting men display. The word is gut. And the other day I saw an example of a Belgian town that seemed at first glance almost impossible to capture, but which boys of the 30th Infantry Division took nevertheless in one of the roughest, most savage fights of this war. And as one of their officers told me later, it was nothing but sheer gut in our men which took this town. The town was Culemont, a little place of possibly not more than 100 population before the villagers fled, located down in southern Belgium, southeast of Malmedy. I don't suppose you can even find Culemont on a good many maps. I don't suppose the battle that took place there will even go down in the history books. But I want to tell you, against appalling odds, was one of the most heroic demonstrations of courage and the will to win despite heavy casualties that any fighting outfit ever displayed. You have to see Culemont, really, to appreciate what the battle was like. Another reporter and I were the first correspondents to enter the town after it was cleared. German shells were still falling now and then along the road leading into the place. The bodies of American and German dead were still lying in the shattered buildings. The smell of burnt powder still filled the air, and the streets were littered with extended shell casings and cartridges. The first sight that met our eyes when we got out of our jeep were two wounded men, one American and one German, being worked over by aid men. We groped our way through the dark interior of a house and found the battalion commander, Lieutenant Colonel Ellis Williamson of Raleigh, North Carolina. "You'll have to excuse me if I don't get all you say," he told us. He was still partially deaf from the concussion of a German shell that exploded only a few yards away from him at the height of the battle. Colonel Williamson commands the 1st Battalion, 120th Regiment of the 30th, the outfit that played the major part in this savage fight. Turamore is not like most Belgian towns. The houses are not jammed close together. Instead, they're scattered widely apart, with open spaces of 25, 50, sometimes 100 yards between them. And each house is built of solid stone, with enormously thick walls, and basements with heavy stone ceilings that could stand even the impact of a heavy shell. Thus our men found each stone house turned into a literal fortress by fanatical German troops. Nazi paratroops who could pour a hail of fire at our men as they advanced over the deadly open spaces between the buildings. There was no cover for the Americans, not even a tree or bush in most places, and they were silhouetted against the snow as they struggled through deep drifts. The men of 1st Battalion, 120th Regiment, had fought with the 30th Division all the way from France. They were surrounded once at Mortain, and they thought they'd seen everything the Nazis had to offer. But these German paratroops, all young men, averaging about 20 years of age, were by far the toughest, most fanatical, best trained troops they'd ever met. And they bristled with automatic weapons, machine guns, automatic pistols, and all the rest, with plenty of ammunition. The battle lasted almost 4 days, and it cost a heavy price. The Germans were so fanatical they even mowed down their own men with machine guns when some of them surrendered and were being lined up by the Americans to be taken out of town. On the upper edge of Turamore, on the side of the hill, stands a big 3-story stone building. It is a virtual fort. It overlooks the path our men had to follow to reach the town, and from another side it gives a clear line of fire into every other building in the place. In that house, the Germans packed 45 men, armed with machine guns and automatic rifles out of each of a dozen windows. There were Germans on all 3 floors, and nothing but open space for our men to advance over. How do you take a place like that? That's what I mean when I say it was guts, and nothing else that did it. We were supported by a small number of tanks, but the weather was bitter cold, and their radios didn't function properly. So leaders got out of those tanks and advanced over the open ground, drawing a hail of fire themselves and waving hand signals to the tanks to follow them into the proper places. Other leaders of the foot soldiers stood up in the open, rallying their men to the charge, firing their weapons from the hip, advancing into the German curtain of bullets. One lieutenant, and he was just one of too many who died a hero's death that day, stood up and shouted to his men, "Come on, let's go get him," and dashed forward. They found him later, a bullet between his eyes. These Germans were sharpshooters, and he lay as he fell, facing the enemy. Our tanks blasted holes in the stone fort. Our men tossed hand grenades and fired bazookas through the apertures. They entered the building. As they cleaned out one floor, the Germans kept fighting on the floors above, tossing down hand grenades. The Nazis fought almost to the last man. Some of them were still hunched over their weapons when they died. That's what it was like at Turamore for almost 4 days. It's a town whose name you may never hear again. But don't forget, please, the kind of fighting, the cost, the suffering at Turamore. And don't forget there'll be other Turamores, many others, before this grim job is done. This is Jack Shelley, speaking from somewhere in Holland. I return you to Des Moines. NBC, that is the last of the only piece I had for you to record today.
Okay, Mr. Shelley, will you ask him if they can come on to the
Hello, NBC. NBC, I've been asked by Press Wireless Holland to ask you to stand by for just a few seconds longer while they rectify some power trouble. So will you hang on for just a few seconds, and I'll give you another warning before I start. Holland to give me the go-ahead from their end here, and as soon as I get it, I'll give you a warning. You know, of course, that I would like to have you send these recordings, as usual, by air express to the newsroom, radio station WHO, Des Moines, Iowa.
All right, John.
Yeah. I'm still waiting for my word from Press Wireless Hearing about this power matter they're trying to iron out. And I'll go ahead giving you a 10-second warning. This is Jack Shelley, WHO Des Moines, talking up from Press Wireless Holland, and just keeping it going while we get word from TV here that we can go ahead after their power trouble has been taken care of. Jack Shelley of WHO, still standing by, waiting for a go-ahead from Press Wireless here in Holland on the first of 2 recordings, each of about 4 minutes duration. Standing by, and I'll give you a 10-second warning as soon as they... Still standing by, New York.
Well done.
And I will start out with the first of these 2 recordings in 10 seconds from now.
Well done. Just going to about 10 seconds.
Hello, WHO. This is Jack Shelley calling to you again from somewhere in Holland. This is another report on the 4th Cavalry Group, the famous mechanized fighting force with which I spent 4 days and nights recently, and among whose membership I found the scores of Midwestern men whose names you're hearing over WHO broadcast. I've already told you how the 4th Cavalry has fought steadily and brilliantly from 2 hours before H hour on D-Day last June, all the way through France, Belgium, into Germany, and then back to southern Belgium to help throw back the Nazi breakthrough on the First Army front. In all those actions, the 4th has taken a heavy toll of the enemy. Just how heavy is shown by the fact that since D-Day, the group has taken enough German prisoners alone to equal a unit 3 times the size of the 4th Cavalry. And that, of course, takes no consideration of the large number of Germans who've been killed and wounded in the same actions. As I was jotting down details of the group history the other night, listening to Lieutenant Colonel Edward Dunn of Stanton, South Dakota, the executive officer, and Majors Robert Tincher and Frank Bredemus of Des Moines recall events of the last 8 months, they told me the surprise blow they handed the Germans at Thiem, France last August. The Nazis were retreating out of France as fast as they could go at that time. When the 4th Cavalry, racing out ahead, reached Thiem that day, a friendly railroad station agent told the Americans that a troop train packed with fleeing Nazis was expected momentarily from the west. This was too good a chance to overlook. In cooperation with elements of the 3rd Armored Division, men of the 4th Cavalry hastily prepared a trap and placed their guns along the railroad tracks. The train came racing along. The ambush party first knocked out the locomotive with a hail of fire, thus halting the train. Then the entire train was raked by guns, ranging all the way from 50 caliber machine guns to 75 millimeter cannons. Approximately 100 Germans were killed and many others wounded and captured. A somewhat less grim story, and it occurred on the same day in August, was the entry of 2 light tanks of the 4th Cavalry into Chateau Thierry, the focal point of a famous battle of the last war. There was great celebration in Chateau Thierry the day the 4th representatives came into the town, and Lieutenant Thomas Galvin, commanding the tanks, was personally greeted by the mayor. Then the mayor officially proclaimed Galvin as military governor of Chateau Thierry, and in that capacity, the lieutenant supervised the rounding up of Nazi sympathizers and collaborationists. As a sidelight, it's worth reporting that among all its other activities, the 4th Cavalry has also coined a new nickname for the Germans against whom they fought. Almost all front-line troops refer to the enemy by some nickname. They hardly ever call just the Germans. And I don't believe I've ever heard an American combat soldier call them the Nazis. The most popular term for the German foe among the frontline Americans is the Kraut. You'll hear foot soldiers say they knocked out so many Krauts in the woods over there that those are the Kraut lines, or that so many Kraut tanks are down the road. The next most widely used name for the Germans among Americans, a term the British began using long before we were in the war. Jerry is still the number one name for the enemy among the British Tommies. But the 4th Cavalry has its own name. It calls the Germans Jocks. Nobody knows quite how the term originated, or exactly who started it among the outfit, but almost everybody in the force says Jocks when he means the enemy. There isn't much agreement on how the name should be spelled, but most of the boys said they guessed Y-O-K-S, Jocks, would do it. There's another way you know you're with an outfit that has a personality of its own in the typical cavalry tradition when you visit the fort. I ran into it when I first started talking to some of the boys, and one of them told me he was a bantam driver. That's a new one on me, I said. What is a bantam? It's another name for a jeep, I was told. And then the boys explained to me that the cavalry is the only branch of the Army to use that name of bantam for the little vehicles that most of us call jeeps. And they're pretty careful to see that nobody in the cavalry uses any other terms. They said the cavalry was first to use the forerunner of the modern military jeep, that the first jeeps were then known as bantams, and the cavalry has clung to that name ever since. Now these things, like having their own nickname for jeeps and Germans, may not seem to be important, but any military man will tell you they're mighty important. They are the earmarks of morale, of esprit de corps, the feeling of the men who belong to such a unit that they're the best fighting outfit in the business. And that's exactly how the men of the 4th Cavalry Group feel. Their morale is high. They've done plenty since D-Day, and they expect to do more. This is Jack Shelley, speaking from somewhere in Holland. I return you to Des Moines. That was the first of my 2 4-minute recordings. Number 2 will come up.